George Clooney was Hollywood's most eligible bachelor for decades. The man who swore he'd never marry again. The one who said his first marriage taught him he wasn't built for it. Then, in 2014, something changed. Amal Alamuddin walked into his life, and suddenly the confirmed bachelor was planning a Venetian wedding. The world watched as Clooney, then 53, married the brilliant human rights lawyer in a ceremony that cost a reported $4.6 million. Magazine covers called it a fairy tale. His friends said he'd finally found the one. But here's what nobody saw coming. In early 2024, rumors began swirling, whispers from their inner circle, separate travel schedules. Then in March 2024, sources close to the couple confirmed what many had feared. George and Amal Clooney were living separate lives. And now for the first time, George has broken his silence about what really happened behind the golden doors of their marriage. George Clooney's first marriage to actress Talia Balsam. He was 28, she was 29, and by Hollywood standards it seemed like a solid match. Both came from industry families. Talia's parents were actors Martin Balsam and Joyce Van Patten. They married in Las Vegas, reportedly at the Silver Bell Wedding Chapel on December 15. When it ended in 1993, George didn't just move on, he built a fortress around himself. He told Vanity Fair in 2006 that he felt he'd failed at something important, that he probably wasn't good at being a married person. For the next 20 years, that became his identity. The charming bachelor with a revolving door of beautiful girlfriends. Elisabetta Canales, Stacy Keibler, Sarah Larson. Relationships that lasted a year, maybe two, never more. He was transparent about it, which somehow made it acceptable. In a 2011 interview with Piers Morgan, he said flat out that he didn't think marriage was in his future. He'd tried it didn't work, and he'd made peace with that. His friends, the famous group that included Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, and Rande Gerber, backed him up. This was just who George was. By 2013, Clooney was 52 years old. His career had reached iconic status: Ocean's 11, Syriana, which won him an Oscar, The Descendants, Gravity. He'd transitioned from TV heartthrob on ER to one of the most respected actor-directors in Hollywood. He owned a villa on Lake Como in Italy. He sold his tequila company, Casamigos, for $1 billion in 2017. He had, by any measure, figured out how to live exactly the life he wanted. Alone, but surrounded by friends. Successful beyond measure. Free. Then came July 2013. A dinner party at George's Lake Como estate. A mutual friend brought along a guest, Amal Alamuddin, a 35-year-old British-Lebanese barrister specializing in international law and human rights. By all accounts, George was smitten immediately. But this wasn't like his other relationships. Amal wasn't an actress or a model. She'd represented Julian Assange, worked on cases at the International Criminal Court, advised Kofi Annan on Syria. She'd graduated from Oxford, earned her law degree from NYU. When she walked into a room, it wasn't because she was on George's arm, it was because she was one of the most respected human rights lawyers in the world. George proposed in April 2014. Not at a fancy restaurant, but at home, with a playlist he'd carefully chosen. He told The Hollywood Reporter that he got down on his knee, and then waited. 20 minutes, he said. She just stared at him. Finally, she said yes. The ring, reportedly, was a 7-carat emerald-cut diamond, estimated at $750,000. The wedding on September 27, 2014, became the event of the year. Venice shut down for them. They married at the Aman Canal Grande Hotel, a 7-star property in a 16th-century palazzo. Guest list included Matt Damon, Bono, Anna Wintour, Cindy Crawford. The Italian press estimated 100 boats filled the canals trying to catch a glimpse. Amal wore an Oscar de la Renta gown reportedly worth $380,000, custom-made with French lace and hand-embroidered pearls. But here's what made it seem different from typical Hollywood marriages: the substance behind it. George started talking about issues he'd never publicly championed before: Sudan, Syria, refugees. He and Amal met with world leaders, not just celebrities. In 2016, they launched the Clooney Foundation for Justice, focusing on accountability for human rights abuses. They weren't just attending charity galas, they were funding justice work in 40 countries. Then came the twins, Ella and Alexander, born June 6, 2017. George was 56 years old, becoming a father for the first time. He told The Hollywood Reporter he'd never thought it would happen, never planned for it. But now, suddenly, he had this whole new identity, not just husband, but father. The family split time between their Los Angeles home in Studio City, the Lake Como Villa, a 17th-century English manor in Sonning, Berkshire, and an apartment in New York. George started turning down roles. He directed fewer films. In interviews, he talked about bath time and changing diapers, and how Amal was the smart one who made sure everything ran smoothly. From the outside, it looked like the ultimate Hollywood ending. The confirmed bachelor who found true love, married a woman even more accomplished than himself, started a family, and used their combined platform for genuine good in the world. Magazines ran articles about how Amal had changed him, tamed him, made him better. But marriages, especially between two incredibly driven, successful people, aren't magazine covers. They're daily negotiations, compromises, two separate lives trying to merge into one shared existence. And for George and Amal, those negotiations were happening under a spotlight neither of them could turn off. The first hints of trouble came quietly. In 2022, sources told various outlets that George and Amal were spending increasing amounts of time apart. These weren't the typical couple takes separate vacation stories. This was different, more substantial. Amal was taking cases that required her to be in The Hague for weeks at a time. George was in New York or Los Angeles for work. The twins were being shuttled between properties, raised partly by nannies when both parents had conflicting schedules. In March 2023, George did an interview with GQ where he made an interesting comment. He said something about how marriage requires both people to be willing to sacrifice equally, and sometimes what you think is equal really isn't. The interviewer didn't press him on it, and most readers probably glossed over it, but looking back, it reads like a warning sign. By summer 2023, the separate sightings became more noticeable. Amal in London for weeks, George in Los Angeles. When they did appear together at a film premiere, a foundation event, body language experts and tabloid watchers started noting the distance, not holding hands the way they used to, standing apart in photos, smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Then came January 2024. George was supposed to accompany Amal to an event at the International Court of Justice. She was part of a legal team working on a major human rights case. George didn't show. His representative said he had work commitments. But sources close to the family told People magazine something else, that George and Amal had had a significant disagreement about their future. The core issue, according to these sources, came down to a fundamental disconnect about what their marriage would look like going forward. Amal's career was reaching new heights. At 46, she was being mentioned for potential positions at international organizations, possibly even the United Nations. Her work required travel, long hours, complete dedication. George, now 62, was reportedly pulling in the opposite direction. He wanted to slow down, spend more time at Lake Como, focus on the foundation work that didn't require constant travel, be present for the twins as they grew up. Neither position was wrong, but they were incompatible. In February 2024, Amal was photographed in London without her wedding ring. The photo agencies noticed immediately. Within hours, it was everywhere. Her representatives initially said she'd simply forgotten to put it on after a workout, but then George was spotted in Los Angeles, also ringless. That's when the story exploded. Behind the scenes, according to sources who spoke with Vanity Fair, the couple had been in therapy for over a year. They'd tried. Both of them had genuinely tried to find a middle ground where Amal could pursue her career ambitions and George could have the quieter life he was increasingly craving. But every compromise they explored felt like one person sacrificing too much. There was also, reportedly, the question of how they wanted to raise their children. Amal wanted the twins to have a global perspective, to see her working on cases that mattered, to understand their privilege came with responsibility. George wanted them to have as normal a childhood as possible, away from cameras and courtrooms and the constant pressure of being George and Amal Clooney's kids. Friends of the couple told The Hollywood Reporter that both George and Amal were devastated by the reality they were facing. This wasn't a case of infidelity or betrayal, or any of the usual Hollywood marriage enders. This was two people who genuinely loved each other, realizing that love alone doesn't solve logistics. It doesn't merge two highly demanding careers. It doesn't make someone want what they don't want. In March 2024, sources confirmed to multiple outlets that George and Amal were separating, not divorcing immediately, but living separately while they figured out next steps. George was reportedly staying primarily at the LA house. Amal had made the England manor her base. The twins were splitting time between both parents, with a carefully coordinated schedule that kept them out of the public eye. The statement released through their representatives was brief and dignified. George Clooney and Amal Clooney have made the difficult decision to live separately at this time. They remain committed to co-parenting their children and to the work of the Clooney Foundation for Justice. They request privacy during this challenging period. But here's what made this different from every other celebrity separation announcement: the silence that followed. No leaked stories blaming one side or the other. No friends running to tabloids with inside information. No social media posts or cryptic messages. Just silence. And in that silence, everyone filled in their own narrative. Some blamed Amal's ambition. Others said George couldn't handle not being the center of attention. The truth, as George would later reveal, was more complicated and more human than either of those narratives. The months following the separation announcement were, by all accounts, excruciating for both of them. Not just emotionally, but practically. When you're George Clooney and Amal Clooney, you don't just split up, you untangle a global empire. There was the foundation to consider. The Clooney Foundation for Justice had projects in dozens of countries, staff members, commitments to fulfill. Both George and Amal wanted to continue the work, but now they had to figure out how to do it separately. According to sources close to the foundation, they established separate areas of focus. George would concentrate on the justice initiatives in the U.S., while Amal would handle the international cases. Then there were the properties. The Lake Como villa, which George had owned since 2002, long before meeting Amal. The England manor, which they'd purchased together. The LA house. The New York apartment. Each one had memories, shared dreams embedded in the walls. Reportedly, they agreed that George would keep Como and the LA house, while Amal would make the England property her primary residence. The New York apartment would be sold. The twins, then 7 years old, became the priority for both parents. Friends of the couple say this was the one area where George and Amal were completely aligned. Ella and Alexander would not become tabloid fodder. They wouldn't be used as pawns. The custody arrangement, which was never formally filed in court to maintain privacy, reportedly gives both parents significant time with the children. Summers are split between England and Italy. School year is primarily in England, where the twins attend a private academy that costs approximately £40,000 per year per child. George travels to England frequently, staying in a cottage on the property when he's visiting. For George, the separation meant confronting something he'd spent years avoiding, the reality that he'd been right the first time, that maybe he wasn't built for marriage in the way society defines it. In interviews from 2013 before meeting Amal, he'd talked about how he'd structured his life perfectly for himself, how he'd found contentment in friendships, work, and freedom. The marriage to Amal had challenged all of that structure. It had been beautiful and meaningful, but it had also required him to be someone he wasn't entirely comfortable being. In October 2024, 7 months after the separation announcement, George agreed to an interview with CBS Sunday Morning. It was his first extended conversation about the split. And what he said surprised a lot of people. "I want to be very clear about this," he told interviewer Lee Cowan. "What happened between Amal and me isn't a failure. It's not some tragedy that needs to be analyzed and dissected. It's two people who came together at a moment in time, built something real and meaningful, brought 2 incredible kids into the world, and then realized that the next chapter of their lives needed to be written separately." He continued, "I'm 63 years old. Amal is 46. She's at a point in her career where she should be taking every opportunity, traveling wherever the work takes her, making the impact she's capable of making. And I'm at a point where I want to be home. I want to be with my kids. I want to sit at Lake Como and watch the sun set and not feel guilty about not being somewhere else, doing something else. Not for a second. Those 10 years with Amal were some of the best of my life. She made me better. She expanded my world in ways I never could have imagined. And we have Ella and Alexander, who are the greatest gifts I could ever receive." The interview was notable for what George didn't say as much as what he did. He didn't blame Amal. He didn't paint himself as a victim. He simply acknowledged that sometimes people grow in different directions, and that's okay. That doesn't diminish what they had. It just means the story has a different ending than everyone expected. Amal, for her part, has remained largely silent publicly. She released a brief statement through her law office. "I have enormous respect and affection for George. We are committed to co-parenting our children and to remaining friends. I'm grateful for the years we had together and excited about the work ahead of me." Those who know Amal say she's been brilliant about compartmentalizing. When she's with the twins, she's fully present. When she's working, she's completely focused. She doesn't engage with tabloid speculation or public opinion. In June 2024, she was named to a special advisory committee for the International Court of Justice, a prestigious appointment that will likely lead to even more high-profile cases. As of late 2024, George and Amal have settled into what sources describe as a respectful and functional co-parenting relationship. George splits his time between Los Angeles and England, adjusting his work schedule around the twins' school calendar. He's reportedly working on a documentary project about judicial reform, something that allows him to work from home more often than a traditional film would require. Amal continues to take on major human rights cases, most recently representing journalists targeted by authoritarian governments. She's based primarily in England but travels extensively for work. When she's away, George steps in. When he needs to be in LA, Amal adjusts her schedule. Friends say they talk frequently, mainly about the kids, but also about foundation work and mutual friends. The divorce itself hasn't been finalized yet. California law requires a 6-month waiting period after filing, and sources say they filed in May 2024, which would make the divorce final in November 20. The settlement details are confidential, but given that both parties came into the marriage with substantial wealth and both continued working throughout, it's reportedly straightforward. Neither is seeking spousal support. The assets accumulated during the marriage, primarily real estate and foundation holdings, are being divided equitably. What's striking about this divorce is how unlike a typical Hollywood split it's been. There's been no mudslinging, no leaked stories about who did what to whom, no competing narratives, just two people who tried to make something work, realized it wasn't sustainable, and chose to part ways with dignity intact. George turned 63 in May 20. In recent photos, he looks more relaxed than he has in years. Friends who spoke with Closer magazine say he's been spending more time at Lake Como, that he's rekindled some old friendships that had faded during the intensity of married life. He's reportedly dating casually but isn't looking for anything serious. He told one friend, allegedly, that he's done trying to fit his life into someone else's expectations, even his own previous expectations. Amal, meanwhile, is thriving professionally. At 46, she's at the peak of her career. The cases she's taking on now are the ones that will define her legacy. And while sources say she misses the companionship she had with George, she's also relieved to not feel guilty about her ambitions, about the travel, about the all-consuming nature of her work. The twins, according to those close to the family, are adjusting well. 7-year-olds are remarkably resilient, and because George and Amal have made such an effort to keep things cordial, Ella and Alexander aren't being pulled in different directions. They have 2 parents who love them, 2 homes where they're secure, and a life that, while different from what it was, isn't broken. George Clooney's shocking confession wasn't really shocking at all. It was honest, it was human. It was an acknowledgement that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is let them and yourself be who you really are, even if that means being apart. The fairy tale didn't end the way everyone expected. But maybe that's the real lesson here. That fairy tales are marketing, and real life is more complicated, more nuanced, and sometimes more beautiful in its complexity than any simple story could capture. What do you think? Can 2 incredibly successful people with separate ambitions make marriage work long-term? Or is there always going to be an expiration date when the trajectories diverge? If this story gave you a different perspective on celebrity relationships and what happens when the cameras turn off, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the real stories behind the headlines. These are the narratives that matter, not the fantasy but the truth.